Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu ala rasulullah. We begin by praising Allah Azza wa Jal, our Lord, our Creator. We testify to His oneness and greatness, and testify to the prophethood of His most beloved Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome to Oak Tree Institute's monthly webinar series. I'm excited, honored, privileged to have you all attend another session of ours, another important webinar that we deploy once a month across some really important topics for Muslim community leaders across the country. If you all not familiar, if you could click through Hassan, if you're not familiar with Oak Tree Institute, we're a nonprofit organization that is dedicated and focused on leadership and organizational development within the Muslim community. Our focus is really to nurture and develop and cultivate leaders that are serving in nonprofit organizations across the country, and to support them and their institutions in the growth, in their development and the impact that they're trying to leave behind. Alhamdulillah, we've worked with many organizations across the country, national organizations, local organizations, masjid, community centers, relief organizations, so on and so forth. We're very excited to be presenting today's webinar. The topic is really catered for leaders. I know it's that time of the year where folks are rolling out fall and winter plans and programs across masajid and community centers and community-based organizations. And so it's going to be my honor to present my dear brother, Muhammad Hassan, to talk about the topic of less complaints, better programs, how we can plan and execute better for our masjid and community centers, programs, and services. I'll do a quick introduction if you're not familiar with Muhammad's background. He is currently a senior organizational strategist with a consulting firm called Slalom. He is a licensed psychotherapist. He's been the director of a mental health clinic. He's worked in the organizational development and leadership space for many, many years. He's done executive coaching with various leaders across industries. And alhamdulillah, he's been with Oak Tree Institute for over 7 years. Serving in the capacity of training across work psychology, culture, communication, and so on. So without any further ado, I'll hand the mic over to Akhi Muhammad. Go ahead. Mic's all yours.
As I get started, if folks have the chance to, inshallah, just put your name in the chat, which masjid organization that you're part of, which city that you are joining us from, and just a quick starter question. What's the most unique and effective masjid program services you have experienced, whether you have been involved in organizing it, being part of planning and executing it, or as an attendee, as a recipient. So just your name, masjid organization that you're from, and the city that you are joining us from today, this evening. With that, I'll get started. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa la. Ya Rabb, subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. I want to get started this evening by sharing with you a quick story. This is actually a meme, and we all know how true this is, but it's a little bit comical, but it has a whole lot of truth in it. A while back, my wife and a few of us, we were out and about in a city that I won't mention, and we decided, it was getting towards the middle of the afternoon, decided, what, let's take a break. We'll find a masjid, which, mashallah, those of us who try our best to pray in the masjid, which always try to find a masjid even on vacations or wherever we are. So let's find a masjid, we can wash up, we can pray, relax a bit, and then we'll kind of continue our day. And so we go to the masjid, the brother and I, we pray, we sit down and take a little break. When we come out, both of us are so rejuvenated and refreshed, ready to go. And then when my wife and his wife, they come out, they seem to be in total negative mood. And so I later found out that the sisters Musalla was through the entrance of the bathroom. They had to go through the bathroom entrance to get to Sister Musalla. It was very small. It didn't smell so good. And this overall, they had a very negative experience. And the sister, she gets allergies, and the carpets were not cleaned well, and so her allergy was kicking in. So it was just overall pretty bad experience. And subhanAllah, I thought to myself that both of us, both groups, we both went to the same masjid, yet we had completely different experience at the masjid. And so that got me to think about not just about our sisters, which I know is very important topic, but to go beyond that, thinking about, does our masajid, does our organizations, are we intentional about facilitating our programs and services that speaks to the experience and accommodates the experiences of various members of our community? And I would go and be explicit as far as to say, does our programs and services, our khutbah, our talks, our events, our trips that we organize within our masjids, are they catering for the various demographics that are important, who are important constituents and congregation? Does our youth program, how does a young single Black sister, how does she experience our youth programs? How does a refugee family experience our Friday night family gatherings? How does someone who experiences disability find our masjid facility or the ease or lack thereof? How does a individual in our community who is experiencing same-sex attraction, struggles with that, how do they experience our khutbah and the topics of our khutbah and the way the things are spoken about? I think it's a question that we all need to ask ourselves as organizers, as imams, as masjid board members, volunteers, is how are we being intentional about the experiences of the various congregation in our masajid? I'm not gonna go into details of some of the stats that exist in this particular story about our sisters and their and how they feel about their space in our sacred spaces. But just for us to start to think about that. So what I want to share tonight, inshallah, is just a 5-step process on how do you plan and execute on your masjid programs and services. And I know, over the last 70 years and in the history of Oak Tree, we have worked with hundreds of masajids, right, and organizations. And we know folks try their hardest, and it's so difficult. There are diverse demands. There's always complaint, regardless of what you do, either way, right? And you have experienced it as organizers, as masjid board members. And here I am telling you do more, right? And so it feels almost like just pressure on you. But a lot of time people expect you to change, people expect you to improve, but you don't even know what exactly and how exactly do I improve our programs and services. So that's what I want to get today. There are financial constraints, I understand that. But we want to talk about just a bit of a perspective shift. More than the mechanics, I want to talk about the mindset of how, as we go about our designing and our programs. If I may ask on the chat, if you can tell me what has been the biggest challenge you face in planning and executing your programs and services as an organizer, as someone who's involved in the masjid of the community. What would you say it has been some of your biggest challenges? And if we have some responses in the chat, Rami or Joel, feel free to call it out. Lack of attendance. First of all, Jazakallah khair, those who joined in, Brother Hussam, Sister Dana, Sister Lana, Ahmed, Wasim, Jazakallah khair for all of you. Jafar Malik, I see a lot of brothers and sisters here. Attendance, okay, that is a challenge for some masajid, a lot of masajid. One of the things that is because at Oak Tree we, alhamdulillah, get the opportunity to work with so many different masajid. we get to see patterns, right? And most communities feel that they're unique in their challenges, right? And some challenges are truly unique, but there are definitely patterns, and similar challenges. Yeah. Getting partners to think about diversity factors and how to make everyone feel welcome. Yeah. That is a big challenge. Drawing in more diverse audience and balancing the financial constraint, yes, and the human constraint. Yeah, you might not have enough volunteers. You want to do so many things, but don't have enough people for it, and you have to make that hard decision. Absolutely. So Jazakallah khair for sharing sort of, and those who'll be watching the recording, you can think about what are those challenges that come to mind for you that you're dealing with right now. And so in this webinar, inshallah, I want to just offer some perspective. I don't claim to have all the answers, but over the years we have seen what works. We have seen what masjids have done that are a role model, and we've seen the challenges. And I hope to offer some perspective on that. Talking about masjid planning, programming, and services, we all know this is no surprise to this group here, this audience here. I'm sure that Prophet ﷺ, in his leadership, he was someone that was a planner, right? From his migration to Medina, to the Battle of Badr, to many incidents in his life, we see how much of a thorough planner he was, ﷺ. And so we take from that leadership example, and that he was someone that focused on community building, right? Essentially, all these programs and services are for the purpose of building and nurturing our community, right? We see how he built the first masjid in Medina upon arrival. We saw the brotherhood system that he created between the Ansar and the Muhajir, and much more. We see for us how he was focused on creating this community. And we also saw, lastly, that how the masjid played such a diverse role in the life of the Muslims in Medina, from delegations that would arrive. In fact, a Christian delegation arrived and they stayed overnight at the masjid of the Prophet ﷺ. We saw how it was became a temporary clinic to treat Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, for example, and so much more. The masjid really played that diverse role in the heart of the community. So we this audience here, I'm sure we all know that. So I'm not here to necessarily address any fiqh issues, those also play a part in programs and services, but what we can all agree on is that we want to cater for our congregation. So I want to start off by telling you about MRI machines. And you might say, what does MRI machine have to do with masjid programs and services? Because there's really a fantastic and a phenomenal story behind the MRI machine. There was a principal designer at GE who talked about his journey with MRI machine. And this is back in 2012. He had his whole TED talk. If you get a chance, check it out. And he talks about how he was so proud of the MRI machine and the upgrades that he made with it. And he went to a hospital check out when it was released, and hospitals brought contracts for it. He was so excited, this machine that he thought would save lives and would be so powerful and would do so much to progress medicine. And he said he remembers going into a hospital and to check out live what's happening with his machine that he designed, that he was so proud of. And he saw that there was this girl that was led by her parents and into their MRI room. And this young girl was sobbing, right? In fact, when in the early days, over 80%, especially kids, would have to be sedated for them to be cooperative in an MRI machine, because the room is very scary. The big machine, the noise, just the ambiance of it. And so that really broke him down, because he said, I wanted to help patients. I wanted to care for them and for them to see my machine in such a light. And so he took on in himself, and there's a beautiful story how he redesigned the MRI machine. And there's a whole project, and they involved kids to draw out their experience. They were involved in designing it, and eventually they turned this into these beautiful designs that were kid friendly. And it just took some creativity. It just took some different thinking. It just took a different mindset. And he recalls he went back to the hospital to check how these are coming along, and he saw and as he was talking to the parents to ask about how are things going and how are the get some feedback from the patients, one of the child, he was nudging the mother, can we come back here tomorrow? Right, after she had her MRI scan, from where she was sobbing all the way to now, can I come back? Because it was so fun. The room looked so cool. And one child was guiding her dad to make sure he walks on the rocks, the designed rocks that leads to the MRI machine. It became a very play experience. It's how a child experiences life, right? And so these MRI machines were redesigned to mimic and to accommodate how a child experiences life, right? And in fact, with this shift just in design, the rate of sedation, this is shocking. The rate of sedation went from 80% to less than 1%. Less than 1% of child needs to be sedated to do the MRI procedure. That is the power of design thinking. That's the power of when we design our programs and services with the people that are going to be attending, with the people that are going to be benefiting from it, with them in mind. So our 5-step process that I want to talk about this evening is assess, design, test, execute, iterate. Assess, design, test, execute, iterate. This is a 5-step process, but it's a cyclical process that it continues. It's never one and done. Inshallah, I want to show you each part of it piece by piece tonight, inshallah. So you want to assess, which is a part that I think most of us are falling short in, because we just assume we know what our community wants. Then it's about how we design, and then how we test them. Oftentimes, this is the part we fail at. We don't test, we don't pilot, we don't try out and ready to be agile. And then how we execute when it comes to our teams and so forth. And then iterate, how do we continue to evolve our programs? Not the same old things we did for the last 30 years, but how do we continue to evolve, right? I was at visiting Vermont, as you know, it's a foliage season. And we happened to drop by the Ben and Jerry factory. They have a cool tour. A lot of folks like it. And they were saying in the tour that Ben and Jerry every year, they, sunset, they graveyard 5 flavors, right? And they bring 5 new flavors every year. Like every year, regardless of what happens, they will sunset 5 flavors, minimum, to continue to evolve, right? And sometimes we think to ourselves, I've been doing this for the last 15 years. I know my masjid, I know my community. But do we, companies that have 50, 100 years of data, they still every year reassess, right? Or every few seasons reassess. So I think we need to get to the culture of reassessing, like continuously assessing, and how we do our programs and services. So let's jump right in here in talking about assessing. There was a famous story that's often used in design thinking and in planning to avoid making errors. Is this story about World War II planes? In World War II, planes were coming back, and they were seeing that most of the airplanes that made it back, they had bullet holes on the wings and on the fuselage and the tail. So they thought that it made sense that let's reinforce these areas of the plane that were getting hit by the enemy. It made sense, the common sense. These parts are getting hit. Let's mark them down. Let's reinforce those areas of the plane. And they found out that it wasn't improving the amount of planes that were surviving. And so there was a mathematician, a statistician named Abraham Wald. He said, what? I think perhaps we are thinking about this problem entirely differently. I think we're thinking about this all wrong. He said, it's not about which area of the plane are getting hit and they're coming back. What about the planes that are actually not coming back? Perhaps it's the areas that are actually blank, meaning the engine and the side of the, maybe we need to reinforce those areas, because those areas, the planes that were hit on those areas that are not the red dots, they're actually not even making it back. And all this to say is that oftentimes in our community, and I have worked with masjid board members, imams, volunteers, oftentimes, we think we know. And because whatever is in front of us is what we assume, right? Is we are often stuck in a bubble, being part of masjid board or activists or volunteers. We have certain audience. So the question we'd ask ourselves is not the people that are already coming or already benefiting from our program, but what about those who are actually not here at all? Or the voices that we're not actually hearing that makes up a huge part of the people that we're supposed to serve as a masjid, right? And because of that, we often design our programs and our services in what would benefit and fit us. You know, I remember many years ago when I used to be a youth director, I had this young brother. He was very funny, and when he was in charge of, getting food for the events, and he would oftentimes get this particular place food. I said, you order the same place. Is it because you like that food, or you think the audience or the people that come for the event, they're gonna like that food? He said he likes it, right? Because he likes it, he orders the same food but this is it's a silly example, but it's really about thinking about what do the audience and the congregation that we're serving, what are their needs, that people that we're oftentimes even missing out on. And so we have to be able to recognize the bias that we have. Prophet ﷺ obviously is in the Sunnah that he would often consult on matters, as is a Quranic injunction as well. And we find examples in the life of Umar when it comes to the matter, some matters of women, he would consult, for example, in the incident of, how often should those who are serving in the Muslim army should stay out. And he asked, his daughter Hafsa, how long can a woman wait? And he consulted, right? And so one thing that we talk about is when we do an assessment, and this sounds very fancy word, but it's very simple. What it means for your community, for your masjid, can mean as simple as having some conversations. But it has to be a shift, not to have conversation just so that you can reinforce what you already know, but to learn something new. And so often I talk about there's a two perspective. You have to get outside in and an inside out. So when I talk about holistic assessment, it means you have to get information from your congregation, from all the community that you serve, and then also from your own volunteers, right? And whether it be through surveys, whether it be through having some sort of focus group discussions, whether it be even talking to masjids across your city or other places that maybe have already solved the problem that you have worked on, just to do some external research, just to see what others are doing. And then also inside out, asking your own volunteers, having one-on-one conversation with your volunteers or organizers, asking them, what did we do right last year? What can we do different this year, right? And doing some internal reviews, and looking through your attendance sheets, looking through your participation rate, just doing some more thoughtful assessment on how things went last year, or Ramadan to Ramadan, whatever the case you follow, but doing that holistic assessment. Just few points. I'm not gonna expend a large amount of time here, but just on very basics. You're thinking about your survey, and oftentimes people get nervous about survey. I would love to actually ask this question here. Oftentimes when I suggest survey, almost I get an allergic reaction from masjid board members or masjid organizers. I'm not sure if this audience here feels the same way, but what are some hesitation that you have in doing survey? Because perhaps I think we misunderstand survey, and then how we even deploy it might look different for your masjid, right? And often people are not going to fill it up, or it's not going to work, we're going to get the same result. But maybe I can shed some light. I would love to hear what are some common sort of what are your hesitation, you personally, what are your hesitation of I don't know about surveys, I'm not sure if that's going to work. Anyone here, or you're all just very much like, yes, we believe in surveys? I'll give it a few seconds if we have anybody in the chat. Okay, so it looks like folks here believe in survey. So I think we need to also think about, we need to learn about surveys. Surveys is difficult. Getting people to respond, it is tough. It is tough. So there are best practices for surveys. This is an art. This is, you know, companies spend thousands of dollars perfecting surveys, improving them. And so, but here are some quick best practices, and you know, inshallah, maybe we can have a full webinar on surveys. And I think specifically surveys and how we design them. Because as the questions that you ask, how you ask the question, when you ask the question, when it's sent out, how is it sent out, how are the feedback given, and how do you account for biases? For example, you know, some people will fill out the survey and some people won't, right? And how do you sort of do that? I'm not saying to do some sort of a very heavy regressional analysis, right? This is not a business advisory that I'm giving to you, but that there are ways to improve your survey. Just because you did it once or twice and didn't get a good result, there's no other better way of assessing and getting you know, qualitative and quantitative more so data than surveys. And survey can mean a whole lot of things. There are a lot of ways doing survey, but you know, just a few quick things to think about here. You know, make sure you optimize the survey for mobile and you know, keeping them short, asking one question at a time so you can actually do some analysis. Vary your types of questions that you ask. Have a purpose for your survey. What exactly are you trying to get at? What's the response you're looking for, right? And then where do you send out, and how do you ask those demographic questions? Those are all important things to sort of keep in mind. And again, you know, this is a whole big topic, and hopefully perhaps we can have a webinar on just how to do surveys. You know, then how do you deliver the survey, right? Some people said, you know, I would try it after Jummah. You know, maybe after we ask everyone, please take out your phone and just do this right now before you leave, right? Or leverage a Friday night family event and so forth. But there are ways to think about how do we service. And then there's even another question about how do we serve people that don't come to our masjid, people that we don't have enough access to. So how do we leverage a third party or third spaces and those organizers to put our survey out? Because we know some of our folks who could be attending, they are at those spaces. So there are ways to think about this beyond just you know, very standard way. If you are to do focus group, for those of you who are not familiar with what a focus group is that it's beyond a survey. You take a group of people and you sit them down and have a longer discussion. This is not your fellow board members or your fellow volunteers. These are just your fellow congregation. So you ask at Jummah or at an event that would love to talk to a few people, and you set some criteria around who do you want to speak with, right? Maybe you want to speak with young mothers. Maybe you want to speak with you know, some elders who are retired. Maybe you want to speak with some college students. Whatever demographic that you decide, you sit them down and you have some in-depth discussion about what is it that they would love to see from the masjid? What is it that they, and it's not a place for you to respond. Often you will, especially when it comes to inside out, when you're surveying your own volunteers and having one-on-one conversation with your volunteers, you will be tempted to respond and say, no, we have been doing this way. This is not a time for respond. This is for you to have an open kind of a space for them to share whatever complaint and frustration you have. You might say, well, you know, if we open that lane up, I know a few brothers who, you know, they perhaps want to join the board and they didn't get elected this year, so they have a lot of negative things to say about the board. Yeah, I know those politics, but I think it's a space for you to provide the opportunity for folks to really open up and share, good or bad. You have to take everything. You could take the things with a grain of salt. You can, and perhaps maybe you want to change and challenge your thinking that you have. Right, especially if a group or team have been working together for a long time. There's a concept called groupthink, right? You tend to start to think the same way, right? So yeah, absolutely. A creating survey and conducting focus group is a skill, and they can be learned. You know, look. The fact of the matter is, and I say that with all due respect, most of our masjid organizers, our masjid board members, our volunteers, most of us are not professionals in running organizations. We are physicians, we are dentists, we are engineers, we are IT folks. We weren't trained in running organizations, and so it's okay, and it's okay to say there's a gap. It's okay to say that we need to learn certain skills, right? And that's normal. That's okay, and that's why we're here at Oak Tree, you know, inshallah, to provide some of that skills, inshallah. So that's when it comes to conducting your assessment, and inshallah we can go much more in depth, but just to give you at a high level, those are the things that you want to be thinking about as we assess. Next, I want to move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is designing. Now, before I do that, I want to sort of talk through a little analogy with you. If there's any pressing questions, anything like that I missed, or pressing comment on the chat on the topics that I have talked about so far, Rami, Jawad, feel free to get off mute and stop me so I can address that. Or else we'll leave time at the end to kind of address everything.
Yeah.
Questions,
no, nothing particular, but if anybody does have a Q&A or a question that they want to answer, just please use the Q&A panel to send that question. I'll be monitoring that, inshallah, for you.
Okay, jazakallah khair.
Yeah, also I think at the end of the session, perhaps we can go back to some of the comments and maybe respond back, Hassan.
Okay, sure. That sounds like a plan. Inshallah, if that's okay with everyone, I could do that. So let's talk about step number 2, which is designing. As I do that, here's a little analogy. This is an exercise that's often done for customers, but I think it's a valid and a very useful tool to think about. So I want you to imagine a mother with a child, and what's her experience like traveling with this child through the airport. So a mother with a child traveling through the airport. And if I were to segment out, her process, starting from home all the way to getting onto a plane, what would be those steps, right? What would be those process? And that process, by the way, we call it a journey mapping. That's the technical term for it, journey mapping. So you could say, step number 1, she would prep, the travel, she would, prep the baby and so forth. And then, getting the stroller, getting in the car, getting to the airport, finding easy ramps. You could map out sort of all the steps. But beyond that, we get to something called empathy mapping, which is for each step, how is she feeling and how is she experiencing those process? So is she nervous? Is she anxious? Is she like, oh my God, I hope he's not going to he's going to sleep. I hope. What are her emotions as she's experiencing these steps, right? And airports, they spend money in thinking through what this mother with the child will go through, because then they can design their airport to facilitate a mother traveling, right? And you wouldn't know that until you are a mother with a child going through the airport. You as a person who's not going through, you will not notice that difference, right? Same way, me as a brother, coming into a masjid, I wouldn't realize that the sister section is hard to find. I wouldn't know that because I'm not a sister. But if I was, and I was to walk into masjid, I'd be like, I can't find what this section is. The signs aren't too good, right? And so, or someone more drastic example, someone with disability. Oh wow, this is a long flight of stairs. I didn't realize this is a bit tough, right? Or you had an injury from playing sports, didn't realize, wow, okay, my masjid is tough to access if you can't really walk because we don't really have. So your experience changes, and so part of designing, right, and part of organizing and then is to go through this exercise, right? When I do this workshop with masjid board, I often ask them first to go out and think about all the personas, right? Think about all the groups that you serve in your masjid, and the groups that you want to be serving, and actually list them out, right? Not just programs and services for the groups that so not just for youth who are teenagers, but young professionals who are above 25, and not just young professionals, but for refugee families. But no, think about each of the demographics and different segments of population that you are serving, and then go through the exercise. How does a masjid feel for them? How does a khutbah resonate with them? And you would find that your perspective changes drastically, because oftentimes we are coloring our programs and activities with our own biases. And so part of the exercise is to think about the personas that we have. And the Prophet obviously we know the famous hadith where he shortened the salah because a child was crying. So he was concerned about the experience of the mother in the masjid, right? Among other things, he was concerned about the experience of the mother in the masjid. So you think about the programs and services, our facility, does it facilitate for a mother, right? Or you think about Prophet ﷺ, he elongated his sujood, and the Sahabas asked him, why did you elongate your prostration? He said, because his grandchild were on top of him, and he didn't want to kind of push them away, because a child world is a world of play, and so he wanted to allow for that, for that child to experience masjid as a positive place, right? And think about, how are we designing our program services? Does it facilitate for a child to feel that our masjid is a that space? Or even think about the woman who came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, the men are taking all your time. We don't have time with you. And so he created a new program, essentially, that I will meet with the sisters at this time to provide additional time beyond what's already there for all the co-ed times that are there, right? He created a new program to facilitate and be intentional about a group that wasn't getting enough attention. And so as a masjid, as an organization, doing that exercise, and this actually requires a lot of thoughtfulness to think about all the categories of constituents, all the categories of our congregation that you're serving, and then thinking about how are they experiencing our masjid, how are they experiencing our programming. And then to be strategic about this, you want to make sure that all your programs and services are aligned to the overall masjid mission, right? And you're not just throwing program because you're throwing program, right? It's intentional, right? That you're trying to drive toward a result. If I ask you, these are all your list of programs and services that you have in your masjid, what are you trying to achieve with this particular program? Like, what is the goal? You have to be able to give me clearly what is it that you're trying to drive towards, right? Not just like, yeah, we're a masjid, we have to have this. This is what we do. No, you want to prioritize. Just because you have been doing it for the last 10 years doesn't mean you have to continue doing it, right? It doesn't have to be. Just because everyone else is doing it in your area doesn't mean you have to feel compelled. And you'll find often in the city that one masjid does something and not someone else does it, and you don't need to. There's no compelling reason for you to copy and paste just because someone else is doing it. What is it that you want to do and your congregation needs, right? And be ready to let go of things that are not serving, right? And you want to also co-create, right? Like the example of the MRI machine, you want to co-create a program so that you are creating a program for a young professional, for example. Are you designing the program with a young professional? If you have a youth program or preteen program, is a preteen involved in giving you ideas about how the program should be designed? Or you say, no, I know better, right? And that's just a simple example. And there are a lot more complex examples than that. Thinking about the constitution that we serve, and as complex as individuals in our community who are dealing with same-sex attraction, thinking about our topics, thinking about how our talking points, thinking about how we make our spaces safe for folks who are struggling. Those are difficult questions. But when we design our program services, are we keeping that in mind, right? We know the famous example where Mu'adh ibn Jabal used to go and lead Salah, and the Bedouin complained to Rasulullah that Rasulullah, we work long days in the field, and Mu'adh leads Isha with Surah Al-Baqarah. Like, we don't have time for that. And so Rasulullah said, and he told Mu'adh and Jabal and others that don't make it hard on people, right? So he understood that when you design your program services, you have to keep the person you're serving in mind. And last point I'll make about this design is that as you're planning your programs and services, think of your program services in phases, not as in all or nothing. What I mean by that is, when you plan your program services, don't think of it as the end all be all. Think about it in versions. This is how it looked like in version 1. Year 1 is in version 1. Year 2 is version 2. Year 3, version 3. Make your program services in phases. This is our kind of go-to market, the bare minimum sort of, we'll launch with this and then we'll build. That kind of agile thinking is very important in how we design our programs and services. And create the roadmap. A roadmap is very important. And try to consolidate. You don't want to create more programs. Oh, we have this problem, another program. And you often find the same 5 volunteers are doing all the 30 programs. Less is more, right? Less is more. And so this is a little bit of a value matrix. If you are up to it, as a consultant, we love our 2x2s of you. And so there's a joke in business school that you can solve all of life's problems by 2x2. And so if you were to put all your programs on this 2x2 matrix, right? You take all the programs that you have, preteen program, your matrimonial service, and your janaza project, and your yada yada. Take all your programs and give it a rating, right? How much effort does it require? Financial effort, volunteer effort, 1 through 10, right? Give it a number. Then you say, what kind of value is it bringing from our community? 1 through 10. 1 meaning, you know what? It's good value, but it's not 10. It's not what we really need based on the surveys, based on the feedback we receive, right? 1 through 10. And then you plot all the programs that you have this year in this matrix, right? And you will find that there are some tough decisions you have to make around your program and services, because you might need to consolidate certain things. You might need to let go of certain things, right? So that's when it comes to design. Then I'm going to move fairly quickly on the last few steps, because I didn't want to spend most of my time on the first assess step. But step number 3 is very important, something that we often forget. Go for quick wins. You want to test things, right? You want to be agile and be entrepreneurial as you are doing this, and be focused on feedback. As you launch new program, especially when you launch a new program, be thoughtful about how are you collecting feedback about the program. And then obviously we all know this, executing. In executing, there are different things, and it's a whole host of things. But I would say in short, just to bubble up the main themes, is that you want to be structured in your implementation, and you want to be community-centric in your execution. And what I mean by that structured implementation is that you need to improve your operating model, right? And that's a fancy word, but what it really means is that, is your team structure clear? Is your decision-making structure clear? Are there cross-collaboration between your sub-teams? Very important, right? You don't want to create silos within the masjid teams that you have. You want to create a lot of cross-collaboration. And we talk more about this in depth when we talk about our organizational design of our masjid, which is not the scope of our webinar today, but that does play a big role in our programs and services, right? Having those clear team structure, clear decision-making. And then having some focus around customer service. Right, and this is a very interesting term to use in this context. But what I mean by that is, ultimately, the goal and what you're trying to drive towards with all these programs and services is not for the sake of being a nonprofit. Like, purpose of masjid is not to be a nonprofit, right? Purpose of masjid is to bring people close to Allah and build a community. And so it's not about having a whole big list of menu of services and so that you can promote and be big as you can. No, the whole point is your masjid creating a community, right? Are you building a community? And that's a whole host of different work, right? So focusing on that customer service. What I mean by that is, when you're having events, right, are your organizers equipped with the knowledge and the skill to draw in a new person that they see at the event, right? It's not just putting on a good show. It's not about putting on good programs. It's not just having really complicated and very fancy programs, right? It's about whether or not your organizers, your volunteers are out there really connecting with the congregation, really building, making those networks. That's where it counts. So building the personal touch, right? That your volunteers know that at an event, if they see someone sitting and kind of quietly by themselves, looks like they don't really know anyone in the community, that they're kind of connecting them and saying salam. Are those sort of basic customer service, if you will? Is that part of your approach? And then prioritizing your team. When I say community-centric execution, the well-being of your team, your volunteers, your masjid board and subcommittees, they should be the #1 beneficiaries of your programs. What I mean by that is that if they're just being used and abused and being drained out to the point they get burned out and leave, then you have an unsuccessful program, regardless of how many people showed up at your event, right? You actually want to stop individuals who may be doing too much, and you see they might be burning out, pulling them back, right? And you want to foster organic growth. One biggest thing you can do as a masjid is be that host, Be the host for other small organizations to make your place a home, make your place a conduit for them to provide their services. Why do you need to have your brand on everything? This is not, you're not a company, right? Your job is to facilitate community. And so be the host. Sometimes you don't need to create your own program. Bring on others who are already doing something in the third spaces. Make yourself the host. Create a space where anybody in the community can lead a program, can create a program, right? You offer the opportunity. So you take things out of your hand, right? And finally, in our step number 5, it's about iterating. And what that means is you want to take short-term massive action, but be patient long-term. Programs sometimes take time. You gotta let things grow, right? If you're starting a brand new event, only 3 people shows up. You have to have ihsan in that program with 3 people, not be like, oh, you know what, this is just 3 people program, someone's gonna just keep it light. And no, have that ihsan with the first 3 people that showed up, first dedicated attendee, as much as you would when you have 100 people showing up to your program, right? And oftentimes we're so caught up, we need more attendees, but are you serving the folks that are already showing up? Like, are you giving them quality service? Are you connecting? Are you helping? Few is who are connected, who are enriched, is a lot better than massive amount of people. Look, you can hold a conference. Look, anybody can hold a conference. You can host a big conference, bring the same old names, big name speakers, and you have a big event. That's easy, right? Is those everyday, weekly, daily program services that are hard, right? And those are the heart of the community. And so be focused on that and be ready to cut and pivot. Oftentimes we get caught up in the programs that we organize. If it's not working, it's not working. You give it your best, you allowed it to grow, and sometimes it is just not the right set of program services. Pivot. It's okay to move on, right? And I think we need to be agile in that way. With that, I have shared about close to 45 minutes. And inshallah, I will open up the floor for any questions. I will leave you with this. And inshallah, we all know this as folks who are involved in the masjid, we're thinking globally and working locally, and just approach, inshallah, all of us, and I know this audience here, that we approach our community work with a lot of gratitude and taqwa, right? A lot of gratitude that we get to do this. Right? Oftentimes we're frustrated with our congregation, frustrated with our fellow volunteers and fellow board members. But at the end of the day, just remind myself and ourselves that these folks are giving their time, and approach the work with gratitude. That every single moment, money, time, energy that you get to spend for the cause of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an investment, and it's a honor that Allah has used me in that way. Allah has facilitated my time and effort. I could have been anywhere else, but Allah facilitated for me to be involved, and there's a lot of barakah in that. But then inshallah, I'll open up the floor, questions, comments. I will probably go back to some of the comments that were made in the chat previously as well, and inshallah, and feel free to you can also go off mute, I think, if you want to ask some questions as well.
Yeah, I'll help facilitate that. So Hassan, there's at least one question that came in. If anybody wants to come off of mute and ask a question, just have your hand raised, inshallah. I will, as you kind of go through the comment section, there's a few good comments that were made. Ustad Wasim mentioned, like, these are really great tips and great ideas. The level of professionalism is really dependent, though, on the leadership and how they're being compensated. So sometimes many individuals and organizations are extremely passionate, they're dedicated, but the same skill level doesn't make its way to the masjid as a volunteer. An imam, a teacher, a youth director could be paid, to be able to, sometimes they're barely paid to be able to put food on the table, and they won't take the time to commit to the efforts of such practices. Anything you want to say to that?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot to unpack there. I mean, you're bringing up issues about payment of our clergies, payment of our masjid employees. That's a whole can of worm. But I would say a few things is that there are different levels to this, right? I can be a volunteer, because I don't want to conflate two things. That just because someone is not paid, or just because someone is not paid well, doesn't mean there can't be a growth in their work, or ihsan in their work, or a motivation to just improve their quality of their work. You're right. I mean, just like any other employment, when you're already struggling financially, or someone is struggling financially, masjid, payment isn't enough, and they have to make ends meet, and you're not motivated to improve your knowledge and skills in how you run the masjid, right? You're barely doing it. But I think those are two problems that we need to solve simultaneously. It's not if or that. So I think we need to solve our masjid, how do you pay and properly pay and respectfully pay our clergies and our masjid employees and those who are involved in running our organization. How do we elevate that, right? That's for stability purposes, for professional purposes. At the same time, though, we can work with what we have right now. Underpaid employees, non-paid volunteers. I do believe there is a room for growth and an opportunity to improve, even with that group. And those are some small minor things we can tweak and fix and improve, inshallah.
Yeah, another thought from Sister Lana. She mentioned that she believes it's important to be collaborative and have efforts in terms of keeping the doors open. But branding is exceedingly important in the Muslim nonprofit space, particularly a more competitive Muslim nonprofit space. If competitive is the right word. Many of us, if not most, still rely on community donations, and that's primarily based on brand recognition, how your institution resonates, its brand, to connect with donors. So what would you say to that, Hassan?
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point. There are certain number of donors, and if they're giving it to this masjid, or they're giving it to that masjid, right? And then there are, and then people recognizing that, oh, okay, these benefits I'm receiving are actually from this brand. I'm gonna use the word brand, i.e. this masjid, and so I feel compelled to give to this masjid. That is a fair point, but I think I would say that two things to that. Number one, I think we can expand and have a little more abundance mindset. I think is important. That it's not about fighting for the same funding sources, but I think there are room and opportunity to expand how we get our funding sources. And I think when we get too caught up, and I know masjid, and they do it, I've seen it where, it would be that, oh, brother, we can't fundraise, we can't have your person announce for fundraiser because we have fundraiser coming up for ourselves. So I don't want anything announced for your organization, right? I think that is a bit of a scarcity mindset. I haven't seen an organization that have really, been that host that they lose out on funding. It's in fact the opposite, right? So that's the first part of it, first comment, which is that I think having the abundance mindset and realizing that it's not about just fighting for the same sources, but expanding our funding areas, right? And the second part about the branding, I think more and more it's not just about brand recognition. It's very interesting how people are giving funding, especially big funding. I hope we had Nadeem here. He's a fund expert here at Oaktree. You could talk more about this. But especially, our principal donors, those are giving big numbers. It's a lot more about stewardship than our Facebook ads or some, logo or recognizing that this program was for here. It's actually a lot more about stewardship. Those folks aren't necessarily out there shopping for what is the hottest brand right now, right? And let me donate to that. Sometimes it's about the right timing, right? Whether or not you're reaching your donors at the right time. I know someone who donated for a masjid that they get no benefit from, right? Just because it was the right time and they made the right pitch on their creative, online pitch, and they made a lot of sense to them, right? And then there are big donors who are not even looking at, who is most popular brand in the city, or which masjid seems like has the biggest name. They're not even giving to the biggest name masjids. They're giving to whoever they have personal connection with, they feel this is a good mission. So I think I think you'd be surprised. It's a lot bigger, especially when it comes to high level donation, that beyond just brand recognition. But absolutely, I mean, there's no harm in making sure that your communication, your messaging of your masjid is strong, right? People have to know what you're doing and how you're doing them, right? And that includes how you're spending your money, right? I talked about this in the last webinar about how the younger generation, they want to see transparency. So absolutely start there. But you'd be surprised if you allow yourself to be the host, and you have probably bring in more than you lose, and what you're scared of losing.
Yeah, appreciate that, Hamad. Two more questions. I'll try to squeeze them in. I know we're going to go a little bit over time for everybody. So if y'all can be patient with us. Question that came in the Q&A panel. How do you tackle the challenge of age range for youth programming? Many Muslim youth say, youth is 14 to up, 14 to 24. The younger kids don't feel comfortable. Then 18 to 19 isn't youth anymore in America. There are major emotional and maturity differences between 14 and 16, 14 and 24. So again, how do you think about, how do you program age specific? And here the question more specifically about a youth program.
And I know some of us who like to say that 40 is still Shabab.
Yeah.
So on all seriousness, it's really about scaling your program. It's actually not. I actually get this question from folks quite a bit. I think it's actually purely, and Rami, correct me if I'm wrong, or add any additional. You've been involved in the community as well. It's really about what I've seen. It's about scaling. What I mean by that, ideally, we would love to have so many segmented, person-specific programming, but there is the constraint of your money and your volunteers. So it's simply about just scaling. So you start up with a large group. So when you say, we have only one youth program, and unfortunately, we only have one volunteer who does it. So we do it once a week, and it's a big group, and it's hodgepodge. You're right. It doesn't fit the right developmental level and so forth, right? But you start there. And as your programming grows, or if you have the capacity, then you segment. And so it's really about just keep segmenting, keep specializing as your volunteer and your funding kind of grows. So there is no magic number here. So I'm not tell you, from a psychology perspective, they'll mentally, think about, this age group, let's follow there are different models of human development, right? When we can follow, right, let in this stage there should be this group and that group, and maybe it's not by the school, we can slice and dice different ways, right? And I think I'll leave it up to you, leave that up to your community, what makes sense in the way you're structured. But I think just think about it in a scaling way, so that start off with something, a certain level, and keep on breaking them out as you get more people, as you have more volunteers, you have more funding. But if you already have a lot of funding, a lot of volunteers, and you're a little bit confused as to how should we slice and dice, then we can have that discussion. That discussion is not just about from a purely very theoretical level of what is psychologically speaking, how should the division be, right? Or prophetic, and 1 through 8, 8 through 16, and no, that's not necessarily the way to divide. I have to look at what kind of facility you have, what kind of other programs are you providing, how are they structured now, how many attendees per group. There are other factors that will go into how you reorganize some of those programs.
Go ahead,
I'm sorry, I don't have a magic number for you because it's very subjective.
I think it's dependent. Yeah, it's a good answer. I appreciate it. I hope folks do as well. I think it's the right answer. Last question, based on the MRI analogy on accessing vibe for improvement, does extra tools such as a playroom or game equipment, are they necessary to invite more youth to masjid? I guess, i.e., should we be thinking along the same lines for attracting young people to the masjid?
I think it's less about the facility. Facilities help, but I think it's a lot less about the facility and more about the programming. And I wouldn't be too caught up in we need to create a playroom. We need to have. I think those days are kind of gone. I think our masjid tackled that issue 10 years ago. honestly, it's about programming, because you can never compete with their smartphones. And it's about the experiences, right? So do they have people that the type of programming that you offer, the experience that you have, it's really about not about the playroom or the game room. It really isn't. So it's really about the program services. So are there caring adults like who ask about them and connect with them? When they go to the masjid, and I talked about this more in the young professional discussion last webinar, but from the member, do they feel that welcoming? Are there relevant issues being addressed? Do they have a, if you want to have any facility, and this sounds insane, but I always tell al masjid two things. That's my biggest advice. And Rami might disagree, but al masjid, I said the two biggest things I found is a quick win. If you can have a cafe spot and you can have a resident scholar. I always say those two things are I have seen the biggest impact. Again, community dependent. Please don't take my and just plaster and be like, that's the solution. Community dependent. But I do believe a cafe space of some sort that allows the folks to do their homework, folks to to congregate beyond a musalla, and having that by resident scholar, I don't mean a fancy brand name person. I mean someone who's there consistently, will do consistent programs, will connect. Those are very important. But I do want to caution, when I see the masjid imam job postings, it's sometimes it can be quite scary. I mean, I saw a posting, there was nothing left in the qualification. Like it was a hafid and a faqih and a psychologist, and an NBA coach. I don't know what was left on that list, and I think we really misunderstood what the role and the job is. But that's a different discussion for another day.
Yeah. Go ahead, Hassan. I will. I know we're 5 minutes over, and again, I appreciate everybody's time. I think there's a few slides at the end. I know, Hassan, you wanted to speak just really quickly about this workshop. So I'll do the pitch for Hassan. So Muhammad has developed a wonderful workshop where he can facilitate everything that we've been kind of discussing through this webinar in a local customized workshop that can come to your masjid, your community. It's a new workshop that we're rolling out as part of Oak Tree Institute. It's really about this idea of how to rethink building community inside out. We'd love to bring it out to you all. There's a number of ways that we can roll it out. It can be an in-person day and a half format. It can be done virtually. It's very interactive. It is a lot of facilitating and solutioning some of the things that we're talking about. There's an element of it that applies to all levels of your masjid or community center, for board members, for volunteers, for community leaders that are serving in your community, your area. So if you're really interested in inshallah, let us know. And everybody that is attending, I can think of the next slide, Muhammad. So we typically ask folks to reach out to us. I think for anybody that is attending this webinar, actually expect us to reach out to you. We'd love to learn more about your individual organizations and potential to collaborate. Expect us to send an email reaching out to you again to kind of just learn more about what you're doing on the ground, how we can be of support, inshallah, and how we can continue to further the impact that you're trying to make. So look out for that email, inshallah, in the next few days. I hope that this webinar was of benefit. Of course, for those that don't know, last slide, Hassan, is as you click through, we have a lot of content that supports community leaders, obviously on Facebook, on YouTube, on our podcast. Follow us across the different platforms. Reach out to us on our website. Inshallah, we're always eager and excited to support in whatever capacity we can. We have many challenges. Hassan talked about many of them. We have many challenges, but again, we as an organization are trying to be very focused on how we could support community leaders through those challenges. So we appreciate you all. Jazakallah khair for your time, and we'll see you at the end. Our next webinar is October 26th, in a few weeks, at the end of the month, inshallah. So we hope to see you all then. Until then, Jazakallah khair, everybody. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.